Hello and welcome. My name is Mary Lou and you're listening to the Hera Hotspot podcast, which is all about well-being for women both at home and at work. We'll be talking to female entrepreneurs about their business journey and what inspires them, whilst also what living and working holistically looks like to them. In this series we'll also be meeting some holistic practitioners and exploring their wonderful therapies and how they can help us in our everyday lives. In this week's episode, I'm delighted to introduce Dr Ali Haggett, a fellow Touch for Health practitioner and also a mental health historian. We cover a wide-ranging topics of conversation, looking at mental health for men and women in the 60s to how lockdown is affecting us today. We also touch on self-empowerment and responsibility and what our mental health could look like moving forward for ourselves and our children in the future. I hope you enjoy it. So my first question is what I ask everyone. If you sat next to someone at a dinner party and they asked you what you did, what would you tell them?
I reconnect people. I reconnect people to themselves and each other and the environment.
That's really nice. So you started out doing a history of mental health, which you were just saying that you lectured in for 10 years. So what did that look like for you? What was that space like?
Initially, it was wonderful. I mean, I'd been a hairdresser actually for 10 years before that, which is quite interesting because it comes back to the whole thing about connections, and I look back on that quite fondly now. But so I just had a journey through education and academia much later, and I was 29 when I did my first degree. And I just was very interested in modules on health and disease, and it was looking at everything from a historical perspective rather than a medical perspective. And I just got very, interested in history of medicine. And they say that research is me-search, which I really like because I was led to looking at women in depression for my master's and my PhD, largely because my mum had, quite a struggle with that, and it runs in my family a lot. I wasn't doing it consciously, but I think I was just drawn to that sort of interesting topic, really. Did a PhD on women in the 1960s as housewives and prescribing of tranquilizers and depression.
Oh, that must have been really interesting.
It was really interesting because I went out across the country and I interviewed lots of women who had, experience of being a wife and a mum in the 1950s and 60s. And I learned so much from them. I mean, they were so wise and wonderful. It was a great experience.
So, and was that they had found a way of managing their mental health themselves, or was it that they were relying on tranquilizers?
Well, what I found was, I mean, obviously the feminist argument does tend to suggest that it was their stultification and the narrow life that they led that sent them all crazy. But actually what I found was that many of them were quite satisfied with their life as mums and wives, but it was other things in their lives that, potentially childhood experiences or unhappy marriages or trauma of some other kind that had caused mental health problems. And of course there was a lot of prescribing of very unhelpful medications, most of which got, of course, addicted to.
We could talk for a whole hour about that and how that relates to motherhood and women today. That would just be so fascinating.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah, it was really interesting. So that was my journey. I did that, and actually the questions, my next phase of work came from that, because a lot of the women I interviewed said that they were really worried about their husbands, and that actually their husbands would come home from a very hard day, responsible for managing the family finances, and often they would drink too much, often had backache and didn't sleep, or all these sort of psychosomatic problems that they wouldn't want to go to a doctor for. And this kept happening. In all my interviews, this came up. So my next project was then looking at how men in the 50s and 60s cope with all the juggling and the stresses that they had to cope with. So, and that was very relevant because, of course, we have a really high suicide rate, sadly, among men at the moment.
Do you think that's changed at all? Because I'm really aware of that in as much nowadays, that men still, my husband is 56, still has that. And I know a lot of his friends have that, and they're starting to have more and more of those conversations. But that pressure, whether there is that self-expectation of earning and, you know, everything you've just explained from 50, 70 years ago. It's extraordinary.
I know, it is extraordinary, and I think it has a lot to do with the high suicide rate. And I think that there are particular junctions in life for men that are problematic as well. I mean, often unemployment. I mean, men tend to really create their identity around their working role, marriage breakdown, not seeing their children. There are lots of different sort of social issues, I think, that are really problematic for men, and it's somehow not that PC to talk about them or have that much understanding, which is really sad. And that puts men off seeking help for those sorts of things, really. You know, retirement's another one, and obviously later on bereavement. Men often struggle with bereavement, with losing a partner, more so than women, in terms of women tend to keep their social networks together a bit successfully. So,
what do you think needs to change? I'm aware that I have two sons, one's 18 and one's 20, along with my daughters. So I'm acutely aware that I'm raising husbands-to-be, that I'm raising men. So what can we do now that would help them to be in charge of that, to be able to manage that?
Yeah, I think it's a really important thing, and I think it starts a lot earlier as well. I mean, often you see parents with little boys, get up, don't cry, man up. I think we really have to be very careful of the kind of language we use with small children. But I think, I've got two sons and two stepsons and three grandsons now. Gosh. So I'm acutely aware of it as well. And I think because I've been in this role, obviously I talk about it a lot with my young men, they are now. But I think it is being really open about it. And, actually, we now know that men experience exactly the same emotions as women, but they don't actually identify them as well. So they might feel off colour or not right to something that a woman might potentially say, well, I think I might have some depression or anxiety. A male is more likely to think, I'm just not feeling myself, or I don't know what's wrong with me. So it is about open discussion, I think. And I think some of the recent stuff that's been going on with the Me Too movement, which is incredibly important. Obviously, we need to expose all that nasty abuse and absolutely deal with it. But I think that's having quite a difficult effect on young men as well, because I think they're becoming quite fearful and worried about actually how they can behave towards women and what is okay to say, and how do you go out on a first date, and all this stuff about consent, which is incredibly important, but it's equally difficult, I think, for young men to navigate as well. So in open conversations and just luckily I think things are changing. I mean, I don't know about you, but my young men do hug each other a lot now, and they do talk to each other about their problems, I think more so than men might have done 20 years ago. So I think there is change in the right direction, but definitely about being open and making sure that they feel absolutely fine talking about stuff, really.
I'm trying to think and relate that to my parenting. And my sons are very different. They're chalk and cheese. They're only 18 months apart. And one is much happier, the 20-year-old, to have bigger conversations, life conversations. He's done human geography. So he is really interested in how people tick and that sort of political side. And the other one is much more bravado, and it's much harder to have a real conversation, and always has been. Ever since he was little, it's just his way. He won't be told, very stubborn. So however much I have that intent to have the emotional conversations that I'll have with my daughters and to educate, to be open, sometimes you just hit against a brick wall, and it's not always possible.
They're all different, aren't they? I mean, it is difficult. I mean, what I've noticed is actually, I think men themselves have quite a powerful role to play in supporting each other. A lot of the work I've done on suicide prevention is about the very powerful and useful position, friends, mates play in this, really. Recognising if their friend's not seeming right or hasn't come for a pint, and actually that can be a very powerful role to play in this. It's not all about making them go to the doctors and seek help as such. No. There are a lot more simple solutions that we can help each other, I think.
I found at the end of the last year, and I know he won't mind me saying so, my husband had depression and was struggling with that. And it took him a while. I mean, he has chronic pain, so, this has been building for years. And it took a while for him, he'd go to the pub, friends know he has pain, so they're understanding of that. But to actually open up and say, actually, not in a great place. There are a couple of mates where he was avoiding seeing them, and they go, oh, I'm just feeling under the weather. And eventually he'd go, you know what, sod it, I'm just going to say. So he wrote a message to one in particular and said, actually, this is what's happening for me. So he got a short response, oh, sorry, mate, you know, hope you're feeling better soon. But the next time he saw that friend who is very jocular, larger than life, very happy, life and soul, he said, I'm really happy that you told me that, because actually I felt exactly the same. And the more he opened up to friends, all who had very similar happy-go-lucky dispositions, to a man, they all said the same. And it was heartbreaking. It was heartbreaking to know they were suffering, and it was heartbreaking that it took Gordy to having to be open in order for them to admit it to themselves and to their families.
I can. That's a story I've heard so often. In fact, when I wrote my book on it, a couple of our sort of friendship circles said, "Oh, can I read it?" And of all the men that read it, they all came back and said the same thing. I really recognise myself in that. And I know as kinesiologists, we also know how emotional distress sometimes presents in the body. And it seems to happen massively with men, and did right back in the period that I was looking at. You know, you had if they did go to the doctors, it would be something like a backache or insomnia. They might, on the way out the door, just mention that they'd lost their parent, or they were stressed at work, or and often there was this terribly pent up emotion that was causing physical problems. And I think again that's another reason why I'm so interested in the kinesiology and the touch for health, because it's such a powerful way of understanding some of that. You know, some of you, the friends you were talking about, precisely that. You know, they're feeling and experiencing all this, but don't really know what to do with it.
No, or how to express it. And it takes someone else to go, this is where I'm at, to go, actually, yeah, I'm the same. So when you were studying and doing your PhD and looking at all this, what was your holistic sort of representation then? Because I know that's come on as you studied Touch for Health with me, but did you have that mindset then at all?
I had a sense of being very dissatisfied with the kind of discourse I was working with, because even though as historians of medicine, we were critiquing the science a little bit, if you like. We were looking at medicine and trying to understand some of the downsides to it. You know, the way we just look at the body as a mechanical piece is very unsatisfactory. So in one sense, I was criticising that in my work. But I still felt that even at university, obviously, everything had to be so evidence-based. And obviously, if you're funded by someone, I was funded by the Wellcome Trust, who are a wonderful health charity, who are second only, I think, to the MRC in the UK for their funding. So I had a very prestigious grant, and it was a wonderful setup. But even so, of course, all that kind of research relies on an evidence base. So it's very difficult to include the kind of work that we do and those kinds of approaches without having a sort of very strong research base behind it. So I still felt I was caught up in this. Well, we're trying to be holistic here. We're trying to look at, trying to ask serious questions about science and medicine, but actually we can't offer anything else because there isn't really that evidence base. So I just felt it just wasn't satisfying me in terms of I couldn't really come up with any answers. I could ask serious questions about things, but how could I offer any responses? So that was difficult for me. There was a tension there, really.
So how is that? I mean, that's, my husband always says to me, oh, you hate the NHS. I go, absolutely, I don't. They're amazing, especially at the moment, and in trauma, they're amazing. But for me, it's not all about evidence. And maybe that's my faith. Maybe that's because I've used energy medicine with my family for years, and now I'm using it professionally. And it is that, in his mind, quite naive approach going, why do you have to have scientific evidence? Why is it not enough that someone feels better, or someone will send me a testimonial going, oh my God, I feel amazing? Why does that not work for you?
Exactly. And I mean, I think when it comes down again is to our model of healthcare, because in order to provide funding for something, that's where all this comes from. There has to be an evidence base to release a drug or to use a certain technique, or so that's where the issue is. You haven't got an evidence base there. How can we justify spending public money? So I think that's at the root of a lot of it. So I understand that, and there's no point, spending public money on things that don't work. But as you say, we know this works. At the time when I was at university, I would say I probably hadn't really experienced much energy medicine or any of the. I tried acupuncture and a few other things, but I was really quite very, very much traditional academic, and it's interesting how it often comes to a bit of a personal crisis your own part to make you realise that actually our healthcare model is completely it's brilliant for trauma, it's brilliant for emergencies, accidents, as we know, but in terms of keeping a population well and healthy, it's really failing miserably. And I think increasingly actually there are some medics realising that.
So what did that shift, what happened for you physically or mentally that shifted your mindset?
Well, bizarrely, the irony of it, in the last 5 years of my work, I was working on a project on balance, and it was looking at it historically in the way the concept of balance has been used in health and well-being through the centuries, going right back to Hippocrates and Galenic medicine, where, of course, you had the 4 humours and the balance. And we were looking as a team of researchers on how that's been used and co-opted and understood through time, really, mainly in Western medicine. And I was looking at it in mental health. Of course, you've got the theory of the chemical imbalance in the brain at the moment, which, again, there's actually not much evidence for that, frankly. But, how we've used this word, it was just a really interesting project. And I felt the most unbalanced person on the planet, frankly, because life in higher education was getting more and more stressful, so much workload, and systems were coming in, different administrative systems that made it more complicated, different agendas, all very political. And so the real the value that I felt from teaching students or facilitating a student's journey and researching important topics was the emphasis on that was moving away from that and to all these nonsensical things that were making me feel this isn't the job I first went to do. And also you had I think students were increasingly suffering from serious stress and mental health issues themselves, and I was dealing with some of that, or a lot of that, and that was quite stressful. Yeah, I just think this happens incrementally, and you don't always recognise it in yourself. And I think I was working, and then
actually to not know what the alternative looks like, because something's not right, but unless you can see where to go to, you still sit in that space.
Yeah, and I think the other interesting thing about academia is that I don't know if you've ever seen Ken Robinson's TEDx talk. It's well worth looking up if you can. He talks about the mind and the body being completely split. Obviously, in Western culture, we are disconnected totally from our minds, from our bodies, and that's one thing that has always really worried me. Is that looking at mental health, I see them as innately connected. And he says in his talk, all you have to do is to go into an academic meeting. To see this in action, you'll just see the academics basically use their bodies to carry their head around to the next meeting.
I love that.
Because it was so true, and that's what was happening to me. I was ignoring all my gut instincts for not feeling well. If you work hard enough, you don't have to think about those things, and you can just ignore them. And then it was when my mum got very ill, and I ended up in a caring role as well on top. I just had a bit of I just felt that I couldn't get up in the morning. It was that bad. But I carried on actually for quite a lot, another 2 years after that, and don't quite know how. And it's until something stops you, actually, often, I think. And that's what's so wrong, I think, with our culture, is that's happening to so many people every day. Your health stops you.
I think I put it on either a blog or a Facebook post the other day. We're looking after ourselves. The Western viewpoint is we'll make you better when you're poorly, whereas the Eastern viewpoint is actually let's just maintain wellness and you won't get poorly. It's very reactionary, Western medicine.
Totally, yeah. Interventionist, curative, and marvellously so when it needs to be, but actually it's very unproductive not to keep people well in the first place, really.
So in that history of medicine, it's financially driven, that if we get the grants to do the work, but you have to have the evidence to get the grant. When was that created, and how does that get broken, do you think, moving forward, or how do we rectify that so actually we get, or are we going to touch on that later, that conventional viewpoint without it having to be funded?
All of our Western healthcare models, even the American model, is based on that. If we're putting money into to funding research and treatments, then to some extent you have to have an evidence base, and also to be able to perhaps prescribe to people. I mean, for example, in mental health, I think some of the labels are really totally unhelpful. It's just language, they're just words, really. I mean, we can't necessarily say what depression is, other than there are a set of symptoms that come with that, but you can't test for depression like you can diabetes, so for example. Some would argue that there are scientific, in medical processes, that chemical imbalances, but I don't think there's a great evidence base for that really.
Okay, that was my next question with depression. So when my husband he's had sort of mild depression because of his illness, and he's been offered meds which he hasn't taken. And the tiny bit compared to your years and years of research that I've done is actually depression, in my mind, isn't necessarily, I don't know about all the time, a chemical imbalance. I said, because what you live with is depressing. You're living in a depressed state because you're physically and mentally impaired so you're going to feel depressed. This isn't about serotonin. It might be, the serotonin level might be low as a response to what you're living, but the serotonin isn't responsible for you being depressed. Would you adhere to that?
Absolutely. Yeah, and I think from looking at it from a more holistic perspective, I would argue that depression is often a reaction to something that's not necessarily right in your life, maybe your job or your family or your physical health or anything. So yes, I would say it's like a warning sign that sometimes prompts you to change. But again, going back to the whole medical model thing, it's difficult to prescribe things, treatments or drugs for people if you don't have a category for which you can say somebody falls into that. Well, this is definitely bipolar, this is definitely depression. There are a set of evidence-based treatments that we can give for those. So it does leave it quite complicated if we don't have those. It's a difficult one. We don't have those categories and diagnoses.
A time perspective, the doctor doesn't have the time, like Dr. Chatterjee, to spend a week in your house or, to look at every aspect of your life, or even if it's half an hour to an hour. I know they do in some extreme cases, but generally they need to get through everyone. So you can't touch on all the different aspects of your life to actually understand that it is maybe your diet or your sleep or your relationships or your work or a combination of all of them that's creating this emotional response.
Oh, exactly. We all know how time pressed our GPs are. And also, they don't get a huge amount of training in that kind of. I know that looking back into the period I looked at, GPs didn't really get any psychiatric training at all, and they don't get very much now, frankly. So, psychiatry was always seen as the poor relation of medicine in the period that I looked at, and as you say, they don't have the time. I think a few of them. You mentioned Dr. Chatterjee, but I think he and Doctor's Kitchen, Dr. Rupy. I don't know if you follow him, but he's another one that's very much a very conventional GP, but becoming increasingly interested in lifestyle medicine through his own illness. He cured himself through lifestyle things. So I'm quite encouraged that there's a movement. So you ask how we get out of this. I think it's going to be there's no easy answers. And while we have, a publicly funded healthcare system, I think we do still need evidence bases. But I think there is hope that a lot of GPs are realising that actually they can't do much about some of the things that come into their surgeries. But actually we have, one of the things about kinesiology is that self-empowerment, isn't it? It's that self-responsibility model.
Yeah.
That's just so amazing because we all have, we're all our own primary care doctors, aren't we, really? We have the power to do a lot ourselves.
And that's huge for me. That phrase, to take responsibility, is huge. And I don't feel that as a society, and I can't pinpoint where or how that began, we're not empowered to do that. It's very much, doctor, I've got a headache, doctor, I've got the symptom, can you make it go away? It's the doctor looking at the symptom rather than the cause. And then as a society, we tend to, again, a generalization, to look at it that way. It's like, where has that changed, if it's ever changed? And how do we change that to empower people to go, actually, let's look at all these different aspects of yourself and realize that if you eat sugar and don't exercise and stay angry all the time, for example, you're going to feel negatively.
Yeah, I think it's a much broader problem than just medicine, frankly. I think it starts at school, doesn't it? And I think if we think about, we're bringing our youngsters up, being so concerned about their academic achievements, and that some of those really important things get lost at school. And obviously we all try at home to a greater or lesser degree, but at school, if we could just, I always think if you give children the ability to think critically, the ability to know where their food comes from and how to cook it, the ability to be kind and responsible for themselves and one another, actually they've got a great set of tools there that they, the other stuff would fall into place more easily, wouldn't it? I think we have a whole generation of people growing up thinking that the academic achievement is actually the most important thing that they're aiming for. and so much gets lost on the way. So,
I had my I felt like such a hippie. I had my 10-year-old, she's quite a big life change coming September. She's going to boarding school. And I was on a walk the other day, and I can't remember what prompted it, but I got her to stand still in the sunlight, and I said, right, I've got her to ground to feel the energy, connect her to Mother Earth. Honestly, I felt like such a hippie. And and I was saying, bring that energy up. And she had her hand on her solar plexus and her heart. And I said, I want you to really connect with how you feel about going to school and going forward. And it only took 2 minutes. And she went, oh, it's really exciting, Mummy. And it was, why do I feel like a hippie? Why is this not normal that we can't all say to people, actually just ground, forget your head, touch into your heart and your gut, connect to nature, and actually really understand how you feel. And I was saying to her for the rest of the walk, this is really important because you're going to be exposed to other people's opinions of what you should and shouldn't be, of teachers. I said, never lose sight of your connection to self and actually how you feel.
That's absolutely spot on. And I think, for a lot of people, they don't even, I can honestly say I didn't get that experience until, relatively late in my adult life that I realised it's always been there. I've always been a very intuitive person, but I've always tried to stifle that and override it from my thinking mind. And it's been a revolutionary for me to allow myself finally to say, you have all the answers in there and you just need to listen to yourself. And I look back and think of all the times I haven't listened to that, and I know there's a voice in there saying don't do this or do this, and I haven't listened to it. And I don't regret anything, because I think that I can look back on that as a big learning process. We all make mistakes and learn from them, but there's so many times in my life, if somebody had said that to me as a young woman or a child, you have the answers in there, just and feel what's going on in your body. No one ever did that for me, and it's such a simple but hugely important thing.
I think generationally we didn't. My mother's mantra was never complain, never explain. She just was not interested in understanding how she ticked, and so never passed that on to us. And it was always a worry about what other people think, or, as you say, achieving, or academia, or the outside materialism of where you are, and never to have that connection. And the first time I felt it, and I was saying this to my daughters, when I got divorced at 35, and there was a lot of judgment and a lot of vitriol and a lot of other people's opinions. And there was a tiny, and I've spoken about this before in my faith podcast, it felt like a tiny flame inside me. And I knew that what I was doing, however painful for my ex-husband and hard for the children and painful for myself, I knew it was the right thing to do. And it was this little tiny flame that for me has grown and grown. But gosh, it would have been easy. And I was told all the time, you're so brave, you're so brave. It would have been so easy to let other people's opinions or society or what I represented to override that. I had to fan this tiny, tiny flame.
It's a perfect example, isn't it? And I think for me, what's also helped alongside the kinesiology practice and so on is actually mindfulness. And I'm very into people like Eckhart Tolle. I read him a lot. And Chopra, of course, some of that, and learning to be still, because I think with the way our life is in Western culture, we are not still enough to feel and hear those, sense that feeling inside us. So we have to practice that ability to be still and live with some of those feelings before we can do that. And that's helped me, having come into this fairly late. That's really helped me try to do that.
What I find fascinating about this conversation is my podcast last week was with a really good friend of mine, June Barclay, who's in her 70s and comes from the East End and is a healer and an angel channeler and is amazing. But it's all about angels, and it's a huge part of my life. And there you are, highly intelligent, not that June isn't, but you're an academic background and you come from a totally different angle, and yet actually the message from both of you is exactly the same. Is that connection, and it's, I love that. It gives me goosebumps.
I listened to that with interest, actually, and I did see, and I totally get what you're saying. Yeah, absolutely, we're saying the same things, really.
Yeah, but from it's and almost polar.
Yeah.
But the end point is the same. So how did you feel? So you were in academia, and you had your burnout, as you describe it, and then you were exposed to the world of Touch for Health. How did that feel? Was it like a total aha moment, or was it softly catch a monkey?
It was, I think it's when you, and you'll know because we both work in this field, when you surrender and when you open yourself up to new ways of thinking, strange things happen, don't they? I mean, it's happened to me ever since. I've met the most amazing people, and things have happened to me that I can't explain. So I know Jane from Swallow Farm, who was my instructor. We went to school together. So, and once a year, about 5 of us get together for lunch. And I think she just had an injury to her spine, actually. And she was talking to me about how she was recovering from that. And I knew she did various other different complementary health modalities. But she was talking to me about Touch for Health and this concept of balance. And I'd just come from this ridiculous project where I think I probably contributed something useful intellectually. I don't know, really, frankly, but I certainly wasn't balanced at the end of it. And the irony of that, really, the fact that the balance was the whole concept that sits behind Touch for Health, just felt really ironic for me and really interesting. So she persuaded me to come and try Touch for Health level 1 and see how I enjoyed it. And it was at that moment that I could understand what had happened to me and the way I'd ignored my body and ignored all my instincts for quite a long time. So piece by piece, it gradually all fell into place. So it was a weird meeting. You know, these strangest things happen. I mean, my other work that I do is community work, which is basically reconnecting people who may be a bit isolated in the community. And I see it all as coming under one umbrella, really. It is about kindness, bringing people in touch with themselves and other people. And so I do the kinesiology and the other work as well.
That's what I love about it, is because ever since my rebrand at the beginning of the year, I felt prior to that I had to be just a kinesiologist. I just had to represent that in all its wonders, and I love it. But actually I felt a certain freedom since that I feel now I can represent holistic health by interviewing lots of different people and talking about it. Not that I'm qualified in any of it other than Touch for Health, but it's also relevant. It's all about having that holistic mindset that even if you don't have a balance or see a Touch for Health kinesiologist, you're still able to recognise and endeavour to bring that shift of mindset into your life, which I suppose is what you're doing with your wellbeing in the community.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I see Touch for Health kinesiology as one part of a bigger thing for me. And I think when I first qualified in it, I felt I was wrongly thinking I had to become a practitioner of lots of different modalities in complementary health. And again, my instinct was saying to me, that's not you. You're still along the sort of fairly traditional end of that scale. And not sure I could ever see myself being a channeler or I don't know. I'm totally open to it, but I think for me, rather than connecting further down that line, I think this is a huge opportunity actually to use the techniques we have in our traditional model and start to talk to people there about this and say, hang on, there is a set of techniques here that actually there is a good evidence base for muscle testing. I mean, you look at Charles Krebs' scientific stuff, there's plenty there. I worked with people before that I think would be increasingly open to thinking about these kinds of ideas.
I think that's the beauty of your journey, and I strongly believe that everything we've been through leads us to a point, is that you understand their world, you talk their language. So if anyone can have that conversation with conventional medics, it's you. Because if, let's say, June, for love her, although she makes everyone laugh and she'll always tap into someone, you're going to have more kudos in that way and maybe help shift that mindset for them.
Yeah, and I just look back now and I think, I could have helped, other members of staff and students. And if we our whole model of, education is not thinking about our well-being at all. Yeah, there's just so much opportunity for, building people up in the right way so that they can cope with the stresses of life rather than breaking them down, really. So I've still kept all my contacts. They do a big thing on mental health every year. I ran for the last 2 years. I was there for first year students, where they have a whole week where they come out of the lecture theatre and they go out to send them out in the community to work with charities. And so I'm going in to contribute to that as somebody who's left academia now, and I'm doing a workshop with them on connecting people on the internet through Zoom who are isolated and that kind of thing. So I keep all the connections but come at it from a completely different angle, and I hope that I'll be able to be useful that way somehow.
So you touched on lockdown. So in your experience of the people's mental health and their well-being now, and how it's going to look like, what it's going to look like after lockdown, what is your perception of that?
I have to say, I'm really worried about it, massively. I'm not without hope. I mean, I've got some ideas for how we can try and help at the end of it all, but I am really concerned about it, you know. And you've got, I mean, isolation is just terribly bad for mental health anyway. As we know, as Touch for Healthers, you know, that connection you have with people is just the most powerful thing. And I think, I don't know if you saw on my Facebook that picture, the lovely picture of that little girl who met her grandfather for the first time. And that, for me, everyone was saying, oh, what a wonderful picture. For me, I just wanted to cry.
Yeah, it's heartbreaking.
You know, not being able to hug your granddad, or, you know, this for me, I mean, my stepdaughter came for some bits and pieces from our freezer the other day, and we didn't go near her. She got out the car, and their little boy's won, and he couldn't run towards us. And I just burst into tears after they'd gone, because it was so alien. So if you're looking at that on a widespread scale for all families, and you're looking at people who live on their own, I mean, it affects everybody differently. Young people, old, elderly people, really struggling. So I am very concerned about it, actually. And if you can, you know, combine that with the sort of the fear factor, the media are doing a pretty bad job of terrorising everybody with it all at the moment, and the toxicity of some of the debates on top as well. I think you've got the sort of perfect storm there, really. And the touch deprivation for me is the one thing that I'm struggling with. Yeah. Not being able to go just run up and hug a friend.
I mean, I don't buy into the fear, and I don't buy into the debate, and because I'm really aware of the mental and physical impact that can have on me. So I've made a real choice to try and step back from that. And I'm not a particularly touchy-feely person. I put a post up about this the other day, but I'm really missing that. I'm just really missing the concept. I mean, I social distance with the one friend I'm seeing yesterday, and just not to be able to hug her, because we were, you know, talking about the issues I had and issues that she had, and, you know, that just as life. And you just want to make that connection. And I will never underestimate it again, having never particularly wanted to do it, but it was all I wanted to do is to be able to hug you. And for me, it's definitely an energy thing. It's that connection of our heart chakra to heart chakra, even holding hands. You have like many heart chakras in your hands. More than, for me, touch of skin. It's about an absolute stepping into someone's energy. Totally.
Absolutely. And you know, if sometimes a hug is the thing that actually puts it right, isn't it? You know, when you together with somebody. And so I'm very concerned about that, because I think, you know, we're a bit touch starved in the Western world as it is. So we certainly didn't need COVID pandemic to come along and make that even worse for us, really. You know, I think there's a huge lot of issues, because also you've got people who are already experiencing mental health problems, who, of course, their services have been taken away and removed, and people struggling with addictions, no AA meetings or anything like that. So what you've got is everyone's coping mechanisms have just been removed. So I'm really concerned about that. I don't quite know what the answer is at the end of it all. I'm sure there are ways we can, as you mentioned yourself, not engaging with all the fear. I mean, I think that's really important. But I think some people, that's quite hard to do, because these headlines are everywhere. And if you have anything to do with social media, it's all coming up on there. So you have to be quite strict, really, and just turn it off and just not have. I listen to one update a day and find out what's going on, and that's
and it's also touching a little bit what we talked earlier about the self-responsibility. Is, as a society, we maybe look to outside sources to cure our problems. It's a little bit, well, we're looking to government to sort it out. We're externalizing it, but actually they don't necessarily have all the answers. You think, shit, if they don't know the answers, if they can't sort it out, or we can't trust them, or we don't, we think some of their suggestions are a little foolish, where does that leave us? Where's our power? Where's our solution?
Yeah, I think powerlessness has been a huge factor of this, actually, really, particularly when our sort of freedoms are taken away. And there's a psychological aspect to that as well. I mean, necessary as it was, of course, you know, certainly for a certain time. But there's so many things coming into play here, really. You know, fear for one's children.
Do you have any advice for anyone who is struggling at the moment in lockdown of what they can do?
Absolutely. I think all the things that I've been trying to put. So certainly minimise what you watch, and be really selective and careful that you're only just looking at the facts and not all the stuff around. And also there are loads of positive stories at the moment. I subscribe to that positive news on Facebook, which comes up with some lovely stories. So I've got other things coming up on my feed rather than all the negative stuff all the time. I think maintaining some sort of routine where, you have a bit of physical exercise. And for me, the mindfulness has been absolutely key, really. Having that, being able to ground yourself, and then you can think more rationally about the stuff through the day, really. And I just think about a lot of the positives, because a lot of us are saying that, lockdown has been hell, but actually there's a lot of learning to be done from that in a way. And we've had to slow down. Or for those of us who've been furloughed or can't work, we've had to slow down a bit. And I found that I've done loads of amazing cooking, and I love cooking anyway, but I used to get shelved if I didn't have the time. So, I've managed to get hold of loads of fresh ingredients. We're growing vegetables. So I felt I've really reconnected with those simple things in life, and that's a really good thing. So,
and all those creative things of gardening or painting or sewing or cooking or just being with children are so simple but so effective. It's essence stuff, I think.
Definitely, and it's gone on for long enough that hopefully we've all got into a bit of a pattern of that, and it's going to become an ingrained part of our. Certainly, I'm not dropping my cooking, and I'm not dropping some of the other things I've found useful, and hopefully we can be a bit of a life lesson there as well. And I guess the fact that we've all become quite close communities is a positive thing as well, and to try and focus on that rather than the fear factor stuff. I mean, every village and town has got their own little support group going, and there's been some amazing things happening. So maybe that's again another positive thing that can come from this, and we don't give it up afterwards. I think communities have lost a bit of spirit before that. People didn't talk to each other the way they used to, but hopefully we will again now.
I think that's a huge positive, and we've really felt that when we live in a tiny village anyway. But the connection I've always lived edge of village, but now in the middle of a village, and it's about that finding that balance between being friendly and being connected without being obtrusive to someone's privacy. But we still managed to maintain that whilst also, I'm going to Tesco's, or can you pick up that prescription, or all those things. Things has been huge. But for me, it's all those things: the cooking, the gardening, connecting with the children, zooming of the grandparents, and the appreciation. It's just a new value system, or actually for us, it's an expansion on our old value system. We're not particularly materialistic. We don't have a huge house through circumstance. But actually, that's not who defines us. We are defined by our friendships and our connections and our family. And I think for a lot of people, this is a leveler, because they're not able to go on their holidays or go. And that's fine. Whoever has that, there is no judgment in that. I would love to go on a holiday. I'd love to have a newer car or a bigger house. But it doesn't define who I am. I'm still me under all of that. And I think sometimes advertising is such that we are told that without these things, these will make you happier, these will make you a better person, these will make you more fulfilled, but they won't. Going back to that connection that you were saying earlier, and June was saying last week, that's what makes you who you are. And as long as you have that connection, I think there has to be a sense of wellness, of balance.
I agree. And I think, awful as this period has been, I think for a lot of people, it has been quite instrumental in changing, or at least reinforcing the simple values. And I just hope that, even about the ways people are working, managing to work from home, and maybe the commuting won't be quite so terrible in the future. And I do hope there will be positives to come from this. But I also think there will be a lot of casualties, mental health wise. I think the services that we offer, need to get back as soon as possible.
Do you also think that coming out of lockdown, there are going to be issues? Because however much we all want to, in inverted commas, go back to a normal life, and there are mental health struggles now. I found the other day I went to the beach, and now the restrictions were eased, there were more people, and I don't buy into the fear, but I still felt an anxiety after the walk about being close to people. And I was really upset and cross with myself that I had that, because obviously I'm subliminally taking a little bit about keep your distance. And I thought, I hate that. I don't want to come into a society where I'm fearful of, worried about people being near me. There are as many mental health issues to come as we ease out as there are whilst in lockdown.
I totally agree. And I felt exactly the same. And I don't like that. The thought of queuing outside a shop and having a 2 metre between me and the next person and going along a country path and feeling like I'm, anxious because someone's coming close. I mean, it's been a long enough period that those sorts of feelings are becoming quite ingrained in us.
I know, I hate that.
Yeah, that's really worrying me. And I think, particularly with the kind of work that we do, where, physical contact is at the core of that, I think, well, hopefully things like Touch for Health will be hugely useful at the end of it to try and help us, reintegrate properly with each other again. But I think there's also people are becoming fearful about going out. I mean, I know I've got some of the community group people that I work with in my other role. I know some of them are going to be too frightened to come out afterwards. It's going to take a lot of coaxing to make them feel safe to go and do anything, which is another huge worry.
Yeah, it really fills me with sadness because I can see that's going to happen for people. And even though it's like, oh, you're out of lockdown, but it's not going to suddenly end. There's going to be no cut-off point. There's going to be a residual effect from this. I was saying about the indoctrination by the government, which they've to inhibit our movements, to control us, which I feel is taking our power away, is going to have a long-term effect. And I wonder how soon we'll be able to rid that from our energy.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's isn't it amazing how quickly we've all got used to, and there was I noticed on one of my COVID mutual aid support groups that I follow. My dad's down in Cornwall and I follow that one so that if I need to help him. There was somebody posted on there, does anyone know how long, is there a time limit on how long I can sit socially distanced with the one person that I'm going to meet? And it was a perfectly serious question. And I read it and I felt utterly aghast because I suddenly realised that overnight almost, we've gone from a free society to suddenly people are actually asking questions about whether there's a time limit on how long they can sit on a seat outside with one person. And it just struck me as being, wow, how did that happen? And I think the other thing I would say, though, is about this whole journey and what's happening at the moment is that also, I don't know about you when you encountered Touch for Health, but I mean, I'm also on that journey because I feel that it raised lots of things for me. And so I feel that it's not a destination with this, is there? You're always on that journey to fostering that deeper sense of yourself and following healthier ways of being is something that takes a long time, or has done for me. It's certainly taken me, it's been 18 months now, I suppose, since I changed my life, but I'm not there yet. And so that's quite interesting. I think there can sometimes be this urgency that, you found this amazing new technique and particularly during the coronavirus pandemic, I still feel I'm not where I want to be in terms of, and that's about being authentic about that, isn't it, really, as well?
I don't think there is. I don't think there's ever an end to the journey. I think for me, Touch for Health has felt like coming home because it's encapsulated the way I've approached all that. Again, what you were saying earlier about knowing that what you had before wasn't the right way, and it's suddenly given it a label or given it a concept where I feel totally comfortable, and it supports all my other sort of approaches to energy medicine. But I don't think I've concentrated in the past or recently on my mental health, going, well, spiritually and mentally, I need to be in a good place before I focus on myself physically. And now I'm just eking into the stage where I think, okay, I haven't exercised, I haven't done this. I'm aware that I need to look at my food and look at my exercise, and I'm almost getting to a space where I can do that. But I haven't been hard on myself for not doing that, because you can't do it all at once. This isn't some self-help improvement, some diet or some, suddenly I'm there within a week. It is softly catch a monkey, I think.
Definitely. And I think the language you use is interesting there, because I think we'll find ourselves saying that, don't we? I really need to do the stone. I should be up late today running. It's the need, the should, and I ought, and they still creep in, don't they? And it has to come from a place of a natural place where that energy is flowing to get you to do that anyway, rather than that sense I need, I must, I ought. And it's only since I've been doing, or mainly Touch for Health, but also some of the meditation practices that I'm aware of how that thinking mind is still constantly trying to tell you should be doing this or you should be doing that, and that those things have to come from somewhere more in your soul, really, don't they?
Well, I've been really careful not to shame myself about it. A bit of Brené Brown. I'm not I'm not physically where I would prefer to be, but I've accepted myself where I am at the moment. But it's wanting now to do it because I'm coming from a loving place rather than a judgmental place or a shame place. And I think if ever you do anything from a negative perspective, you're just going to get trapped in that cycle. Which if I did, when I had to give up, about 3-4 years ago, I gave up drinking for 6 months. I was advised to by, in fact, funny enough, a physiologist, because I had a fibroid. And I really rallied against it. The first 24 hours, what? Can I drink gin? Can I drink whiskey? None of which I drink. Can I drink beer? No, you can't. You've got no vitamin B, your B6 can't break it down. So I was really ridiculously upset. First time in 30 years I'd not drunk. And it took me a couple of days to go, okay, I need to turn this on its head. I need to turn this into, I love myself. This is a loving thing for me to do. But it was a real struggle to get there. And then once I got to that point, I was fine. I happily did it. I was supposed to do it for 18 months, but I did it for 6 months. I was still proud of myself. And again, there was no judgment or shame in not doing it. But I can see if you come into a self-improvement phase with someone's told me to do it, I should, I must, you're just onto a loser.
Yeah, and it's why I think so many people, myself included, have failed year after year. I'll run for 3 months and then it all goes out the back again. So yeah, I totally agree. It's got to come from somewhere else.
How do you think we're going to be, our mental health, in a year?
Gosh, that's a really good question. I think we have the tools to make it okay and the tools to heal. And I do think, it's an interesting time for people working in our field, because I think we are the people that have those tools, really. And it's less about just practicing it individually on clients. It is about taking this message out there, really. I think it's a good opportunity after this for us to make a difference. I mean, I've been thinking about doing some more public talks, and when we're allowed to get out there and get groups together again. I think it's spreading the word about how important this is, and how the loss of a handshake is actually a loss of something quite massive. And so I think we have, quite an amazing set of tools to try and help. But I think there will be huge scars, because I think, it's not just the mental health itself, it's the fact that, poverty, lack of employment, and all the uncertainty that's created, those are the kinds of things that cause poor mental health in the first place. So I think the wide set of social circumstances that are going to be very difficult for people for a long time, actually. And the community groups that I run with the older men, I say older men, I mean, they're men over 50, so that some of them are my age, they're not all older men. But they're all people who, for one reason or another, sort of become disconnected from the kind of people they want to, they don't get out perhaps enough or socialise enough with people like they used to. Some of them have got physical challenges like Parkinson's, and even with that, I don't hug them all, but some of them, have a lovely hug when we arrive, and some of them are elderly, and it's just to sit and hold their hand or to share something with them. So even for men who don't necessarily find that a natural thing, I found it very powerful and really, really important. So I don't know when I'm going to get those groups up and running again, because everyone has pre-existing medical conditions, so they're probably the last people that will feel comfortable coming out again. And we've lost so much because we've worked so hard over the last 2 years to bring people together and change their lives completely in some cases.
Yeah, that's heartbreaking not to be able to do that. What's your hope moving forward to integrate with conventional medics? What does that look like for you?
I'm following a lot of people on Twitter now who are becoming interested in it. A couple of the doctors that we mentioned before. I've got some contacts where I worked before who are quite interested in alternative ways of thinking. And I think it's just about slowly chipping away at that. It's not going to happen overnight. I think it just comes of keeping in contact with people regularly. I think giving talks is a great idea. I'm really interested in that. And with talks for this, they have to be interactive, and you have to kind of do Touch for Health, don't you? You can't just stand and talk about it. You have to show people, don't you? It doesn't really work otherwise.
No.
But yeah, so, and my writing, for me, my writing is the one thing that I feel I probably can do fairly well. So I'm really keen to write about this stuff. I'm not sure that there's enough out there about this. I mean, there is within our framework of the KF, Kinesiology Federation, and so on. But beyond that, I don't hear much about this. Some people I know have never heard of it, and I think there's a huge opportunity to use this rather than qualifying in loads of other different modalities. I think I've got an opportunity probably to work with the skills I've got rather than try and dilute those into something I may not be necessarily destined for.
It's the one thing I found coming into after training is the first question is, what's kinesiology? So I think you're absolutely right. In order to educate and get that out as a relevant and powerful tool, really an everyday tool, and even if it's just the self-help techniques or to seek out a practitioner, I just think it, and I love it because it does the physical and the biochemical and the emotional. And I found treating people, I've released tension, anger, as well as physical tension from car accidents from 12 years ago. I mean, it's every time I treat someone, I'm like a child, kid in a sweet shop, because the little nuggets that get revealed, the power behind it is immense. And I'm missing that. I'm missing being able to treat that and to be able to make that difference in people's lives.
I know, so am I, desperately. And the goal setting is so powerful for me.
Yeah.
Because you often find that somebody thinks they've got this goal because their thinking mind has thought, well, it must be this, it must be this. And then by the time you've got the end of that discussion, or the first bit where you're looking at an emotion, you realise it's not that at all, it's something else, isn't there? And,
it is. It's one of my favourite parts. I find sometimes in an hour and a half treatment, we'll talk for an hour and 15 minutes. And you keep thinking I should crack on, but I've been able to sit and relax into, I have to trust this is what they need, because if we can't get a goal statement, and more often not, that what we would call a shift happens within the verbalizing of it, and all they need maybe is a little bit of ESR at the end, or just one point, just to embed that in them. And so I was really nervous at the beginning, going, no, I've got to talk, and then I've got to crack on, and then I've got to start touching them, and I've got to make sure I split it. And now it's like, no, that talking, I've seen it again and again, that it's as powerful as being able to touch someone.
Absolutely amazing. And they're always amazing as well, aren't they? So,
yeah. And empowering, which is what I love about it. Going back again to taking responsibility and being able to lay that out, going, actually, if we look at all these aspects of what we've talked about, and all of those have fed into this feeling or to that tension or to that posture misalignment, it's not just a muscle. That muscle represents so much more, the emotion or the meridian. And yeah, I love it.
Yeah, it's fantastic. And I see opportunities for this as as a small part of something much bigger, really. I mean, we've got a little holiday cottage here that I have aims for creating something holistic there, not maybe teaching, because I did the instructor training, but also using that as potentially somewhere where you could come for a bit of a retreat for 4 days, eat really good food, learn a bit about kinesiology, go on walks, somewhere where you can just kind of camp out and relax and de-stress.
Reset. Yeah, yeah, that sounds amazing. We've covered so much, Ali. Thank you. Huh? I think we need to book in another discussion, because your history and your approach is it's lovely. It puts my faith back in modern medicine and the approach, and that we can make a difference. And hopefully people like you who've got that finger already in that pie can keep to have that conversation with the conventional medics.
Great. Well, I don't know if you follow Doctor's Kitchen.
I don't. I will. I'll put a link into this as well.
Because the interesting thing about that was he's a GP who had suffered from atrial fibrillation, which is what all my family have. My son's got it, my father's got it, my husband's got it. Quite debilitating heart arrhythmia, and he cured himself by changing his diet, his stress levels, his sleep. And that's what made him think there is much more to medicine than just what he does in his surgery. So, so I'm just really interested in the number of people who are going that way, and I think there's an opportunity there to connect with them.
Yeah, all hope. Thank you, Ali.
Well, it's been lovely to talk to you.
And you. Thank you for listening to the Hera Hotspot podcast. I hope you enjoyed it. Maybe you would like to check out our Facebook page under Hera Holistic. In my next podcast, I'm looking forward to speaking with Susie Jarrod, who is an holistic practitioner and works both in professional development and personal empowerment in life, death and grief. I'm really looking forward to exploring all the therapies she works with. Until then, take care.